one thing that I think a lot of security engineer, product security teams stop short of is I actually think a lot more about the product development lifecycle. I think about the relationships with my product managers. I think about their roadmap. I think about feature selection. I think about product briefs and product requirements documents. So this isn't like bug fixes. This is like, we've got a fundamental part of our product that we want to make better for security.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Seeding Appsec. I'm very excited about our guest today. We're here with Mark Stanislav, who's the Vice President of Security Engineering and GRC at FullStory. And as always, we've got Nir Valtman, our CEO of Arnica. And my name's Simon Wennett. I lead growth at Arnica. Really excited to be kicking off this conversation. One of the more important topics, I think, in application security. But before we get started, I wanted to ask you, Mark, would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself, where you sit, and what you're focused on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been here at FullStory a little over a year now, and we really oversee security engineering encompassing both application security as well as cloud security. And that's actually company-wide. So we take more of a broader security engineering approach here and make sure that all of our internal stakeholders have the same access and availability to making great, secure technologies, whether it's customer-facing or whether it's, something for our marketing team. We really don't like to have haves and have-nots. Like, we want everyone to have easy access to security here at FullStory.
That's fantastic. And I would be remiss if I didn't just call out that Nir watches more FullStory than he does Netflix. So really appreciate all the great work from the FullStory team, and also from your team, just keeping it secure and making sure that the products we use are secure. So let's dive in. Mark, would you mind just sharing with us a little bit of your story in terms of how you got into security in the first place?
The full story, right?
Yeah. We'll see how many times that pun comes up today. Yeah, we use it a lot too. All right, we hit our quota then. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting over the years. A lot of where my career started in was just getting involved in Internet Relay Chat IRC back in the late 90s, which some people on this call might be very well familiar with. If you think of like Slack or Discord these days, like IRC would have been a bit of a precursor for that. And, just got involved with a lot of different channels where people were talking about Linux security and FreeBSD and web application security. And my first security conference was actually when I was 15 here in Detroit, a conference called Rubicon. And just like opportunistically met people in the industry, found good mentors, really had a passion, especially at that time, for like Unix security. That was a cool area that I was really fascinated by. And just, over the years, got more deep into software engineering, starting to, hack on things and figure out all the really neat ways that you can exploit software and systems. And that passion just kind of kept cascading over the years. And 20 some odd years later, still doing security more than ever, and still equally as passionate about it as I was back, 15.
Great. Well, now I really want to get into the meat of what we're going to focus on today, which is we often hear about the tug of war between application security and security more generally, and the engineering team within an organization. We hear about developers want to move quickly and develop features, and security wants to move securely and make sure that we're, doing things in a way that don't expose the organization or the application. What do you think are the main reasons that we see or hear about those tensions between those teams?
Yeah, there's probably 20 or 25 of these I could run through. I'll give you maybe like 2 to 3. One is, in a lot of ways, application security, even though you can count however you want, let's say 20 years into like AppSec or software security, Gary McGraw publishing books about this stuff for a long time now. It's still kind of in its nascency, honestly. Like, we're still at an early phase of like, what does like holistic application security maturity really look like? For many years, we focused on things like just static code analysis, or, just pen test everything and find all the vulnerabilities one by one. And, this idea of shifting left, we hear a lot, certainly there's a lot of marketing on. For me, I'm really deeply, deeply focused on shifting left, as in kind of the Microsoft security development lifecycle where training is the start of the left. It's, in the industry, we think a lot about left is like the CI/CD pipeline. And for me, that's an anti-pattern long term. And so I think that maturity curve is still underway, and making sure that we are enabling engineers to become security engineers, not to have security teams that are the only possible place you'll find vulnerabilities and abuse cases. So we're still early, even though it feels like we're kind of late in some ways. The second one is honestly where security teams started from, right? A lot of security teams began under a CFO, right? Looking at things like SOX, not with SOX, that is, or maybe a legal team, right, for regulatory needs. And it's been over the last, maybe more like 10 years, let's say, where you see a product generative team that probably lives under a CTO, where you might have a CISO report to a CEO. They might dotted line to a board. They might report to the CTO, where historically maybe they reported to a CFO or a legal head. The relationship model is still evolving, and the places where you build partnerships are still evolving. I think we're getting kind of closer to the pin, if you will, but that's one thing that's taken decades to kind of get us to where the engineers live and work and breathe. And so that relationship model is underway still as well. The other one, which is more maybe metadata, is I've always operated product security engineering teams with the mindset of customer service. I did a lot of IT help desk in my career. I've done security consulting. If you do not come with the mindset that you exist to serve others to be successful at their job, you've already lost kind of the war, or at least a few of the battles. So making sure that we as a industry understand that if we do our job well, it makes the business succeed, but we do not exist in a vacuum to do our own job. Like, we exist to make others successful in their job. And for many, many years, unfortunately, kind of ivory tower security teams where you come in, throw bugs over the wall, pen test and do a touchdown dance on security software engineers. I would like to say that we're past those sorts of like phases, but I think there's still some of that either exists, or more specifically in my career, there's a lot of engineers that have dealt with bad security teams for 10 or 15 years. And you really have to like reestablish what does good security look like? How do we treat you better than you've been treated before? And so there's a lot of that like emotional debt that is carried with engineers across their career. So even if you're the good, the good guys on this side of things, there's a lot of trust and respect that you have to rebuild based on what everyone else had done to those engineers prior. And so that's another area that we just haven't seen those relationships established long enough in a healthy way. And that's another great opportunity for us.
I think that you mentioned something very interesting, and I'll just repeat that. You mentioned that security teams need to be like customer success, which is very fascinating, because typically when we see security teams, they typically tell you what to do, as you mentioned, right? I just wonder, when it comes to becoming the customer success of the engineering teams, what does that actually mean from your perspective? I can share later what it means from my perspective, but happy to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah. So one of the things, going back to kind of the secure development lifecycle, is at each phase of the SDL, like the question I've always asked my teams, or we've established, is what are we going to do at that phase of the SDL to enable, empower, make our customers succeed? And so when it comes to training, good, like really simple example, we all know that a bunch of corporations out there are giving OWASP top 10 copy and pasted content from 15 years ago trainings that are slideware or like Q&A, like quizzes, or I myself and Fletcher that used to run the company Hunter 2 that was acquired by Veracode a while back, we gave a talk at Black Hat a few years ago about education in application security and how much of it is based on anti-patterns, antiquated data, kind of useless guidance that doesn't really have meaning to most engineers. And so for us, we have built ground up curriculum in the tech stacks, the languages, the vulnerability classes that are most applicable to our customer. And we also would give that training without requiring it to be taken. And you might go, well, if no one's required to take it, no one's going to take trainings. Completely opposite. When you don't require it and you build great content, because if you require people to take training, you have a perverse incentive to not make good training because they have to take it either way. Who cares? But if you want people to come on their own accord it's word of mouth. It's people that are bought into it, that it made their career better. It made them excited or interested. So it's things like that for me. When I think of like customer success, I am coming to where the engineer is. I'm speaking up to them rather than down to them. I'm challenging them because they're very smart, and I'm giving them useful, valuable information that will make them better engineers in their career. Those are all kinds of principles that we would want, customer success teams to have as a vendor to a customer. We're enabling, we're empowering, and we're enriching them.
Interesting. And I completely agree with you. It's better providing something valuable as opposed to enforcing that on the engineers. I can share, as I mentioned, I'd be happy to share my thoughts about it. So one of the things that can occur from a technical standpoint, for example, is where you implement gates or guardrails into whatever you have in that development ecosystem. Can be, let's just give an example, breaking builds or CI/CD pipelines, whatever, because it's the shift left, which I know we can talk about it. We both disagree about what is really left. With that said, when you start taking responsibilities or provide a specific service to the engineering teams, you end up with certain rejects in some cases. Maybe you did implement a security check that it's clean for a while, and then suddenly developers need to push a hot fix and you block it. And therefore, the customer success that is, I think, worth be implemented, at least on our side, is have an SLA to the engineering teams. They don't need to wait because they are running all the time. They need to deploy all the time. And although maybe you can't put it immediately as this is the service SLA that you have, you still want probably to have this capability that says anything that is being opened and needs to be bypassed, we'll do a trust by verify, or maybe something that is absolutely a no-no, we'll give you a whatever X amount of minutes, hours, hopefully not days, until you respond to the engineering teams. So maybe kind of a mix between what you can trust, but what requires your attention, and you are the only one that can approve it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And I think a phrase that I use probably too much at work and in conference talks is talking about the crawl, walk, run, right? And there's a lot of kind of Boolean thinking in security historically, where it's hey, we have stat code analysis, therefore it's going to be applied 13 different places in an environment, and it's going to break, as you mentioned, like break the build. And one of the things that we are very big proponents of, especially the team I ran at Duo Security, we and I think this is something that we share with kind of the Arnica team as well. We didn't actually build security into the I would say like the production CI/CD. We actually think that's more or less a problematic way of approaching. We actually had our own separate security pipeline, because the reality is, every company has to, and I think this is something a lot of people get wrong, frankly, every company has to build a security program around the ways of working of their engineers. And so if you're a company that is shipping, and companies do this, like if you're shipping 1,000 builds a day, that is a different problem than if you maybe have a 2-week sprint release cycle. And I don't think enough security leaders spend enough time understanding how do you speed up or how do you slow down, and like that current of work is something that you should be you should ride the current of your engineers versus like set up a dam over here and like divert the water over here and put in a sewer system over here. Like it really is about like the harmony of security with engineering rather than building security through engineering as a team.
I agree. I'll give you another example of a pain that I had in the past. I'm having a hard time to even think about it right now. But we actually implemented in one of my previous roles a step that breaks builds. Breaks the builds, or actually breaks the deployment after it was built. And thing is that we had certain products that built in minutes, but we also had products that were built in like 2 days. And imagine how would that look like, or how it looked to me when security broke a build after 2 days, or broke a deployment after 2 days. So it very aligns with what you mentioned about putting it in the right place and working when, around the engineering teams, but even that, in certain companies, you may need to adopt multiple ways to work with different engineering teams.
Yes, something we talk a lot about at Arnica, shift left is used so often, but there are so many different ways of how to shift left. What are you shifting left? What is left, right? Like all these sort of open questions that if answered incorrectly can be really, really detrimental to the success of a security practice. Are you shifting effort and work left, or are you shifting automation and mitigation left? Are you as you said, are you shifting left in a way that is disruptive, or are you shifting left in a way that has a deep understanding of how your engineering team works and how the development lifecycle works? So I think maybe that's something we'll come back to, but I love to hear the questions underlying the principle. I'd love to move on to, Mark, what are some of the key challenges that you've run into in working with engineering? You don't have to call anybody out in particular, but I think the flip side of that question is, how did you work together to collaborate to a place of solution or a better way forward?
Honestly, it's kind of a nice segue and really what you're just keyed off of a second ago. One thing I think that we lose focus on, and perhaps a little bit through the dogmatic, hey, just put all the tools in the pipeline and security solve itself. We have so many different opportunities with which to share value with engineers, and I think that's the right way to think about it and the right framing. So there are certainly educational opportunities, or maybe even like early interventions in like the IDE, right? There are certain plugins or certain, static code analysis or linters where in the developer experience, before they commit code, before anything else happens, like they're getting some feedback in the IDE. But I think those are places where you want to have like very high signal, low false positive rates, focus on like core, like first principle security in that sort of interface to not slow them down or frustrate them. When you commit to GitHub, let's say you're like your VCS, there are other interventions in that during the peer review process, whether it's automated and integrated like static code analysis, whether it's peer review process, code signing, right? Like there are these different stages of the SDLC. And instead of using like a peanut butter approach to security where you just copy and paste the same tests, the same abuse cases in every place, a great security team is thinking about like, okay, this has the most value to the engineer over here. This has the most valuable here, here, and here. And if you do it well, your engineers should kind of be guided through your security engineering lifecycle as they go through their development lifecycle, but they should not see the same alerts in like 5 places because they're going to get fatigued. So I think that's like one of the areas of like collaboration is knowing how they work, where they work. One, I guess pro tip to other teams. One thing I did at a previous company, I actually created as part of the new hire engineer training, not security training, but like engineer training. I created like a really simple, like, first 90-day sort of survey with the rest of their onboarding curriculum. And it said like, hey, like what IDEs do you use? What languages are you writing in? What is your experience in, have you taken like third-party security trainings? Did you go and get, did you have security courses if you went to college? There was kind of this, like, Q&A, like very simple questionnaire. But as you aggregate that information, you understand your customer. You understand where they're working, how they're working, what their experience level is. And so you're building and crafting what they need, not just what you can provide. And again, I think this is like very high-minded, I'm sure, to some people listening, but that's how you make people happy. That's how you like achieve goals. It's like any vendor, like if you were not doing customer research, if you were not having customer success calls, if you're not having checkpoints in deployment, you're going to miss a ton and you're going to churn customers. We churn engineers if we do not do the right thing as security teams.
That's interesting. And that's really interesting approach. Really learning what they use at the onboarding, which is not only what you have on your workstation, it's probably also what you are excited about, or which tools you are excited about that can actually teach you about what is the next thing or next tool that you want to integrate with the assumption that it will be adopted. I can tell you that I also installed, maybe one or two IDE plugins in the past. And one of my challenges was, because I also like to write code, one of my challenges was that when I see issues, I see all issues. And I don't see which issues I need to resolve, or, as you mentioned, what is really important. So how is it filtered for me? How do I know what is important to fix? And two, for those things that I don't think I should fix them, then how do I actually dismiss it in a way, or maybe request a dismissal from an Appsec team? And I wonder, what are your thoughts about that in terms of how do you get that developer feedback to maybe as early as possible, if that's the right place, and then that would potentially avoid flagging those issues again when it goes to the right side of the development lifecycle?
Kind of going back to, and it's a really good question, the ways of working here, for instance, one of my old teams had actually built a whole kind of corpus of rule sets for Python and with Flake 8, which, if you're a Python engineer on the stream, very kind of standard, sort of linting tool that a lot of people use, but you can build modules for Flake 8. And so we actually leveraged a module for Flake 8, and all those rules were committed to our internal repo, right? So if engineers had a problem, they were like, oh, I use Flake 8 already. I know what Flake 8 is. I know how it works. I know what modules are. And so if they had concerns or problems, they could do a PR to our repo with the rule set, or they could open an issue in our GitHub. And so while that's not perfect for every use case, obviously there's great commercial tools out there for this use case, it gets back to the spirit that we did not try to obscure the security magic that we're doing, or make it, you must be this high to ride the ride sort of things. We worked with things they already worked with. We built things that were accessible and visible and transparent. And I think that helped a lot. And it also, another kind of just adjacent example, threat modeling, right? A lot of companies talk about how they have the threat modeling, capability at their company. Most of them don't. I mean, honestly, most of them don't actually have threat modeling. And one of the things we found, for instance, was that a barrier to entry with threat modeling for engineers is tooling. Like, how many actual threat modeling tools are on the market? Most people end up going to Microsoft's threat modeling tool. Like, that's like almost the only one out there, really. And so what we ended up doing is, a lot of our companies, and many companies these days, we're all Macs. That tool runs on Windows. Well, what do you do now? And so what we actually ended up doing, we actually did ephemeral desktop VMs in Amazon Web Services that had the threat modeling tool on it. So they didn't have to install, manage it. They could just load it up, access it, get their files, and then export them. It's just like those barrier to entries. You can talk about these ideas all day long, but if you're not actually enabling people to burn down the things that are keeping them from doing the right practices, and over time, we also did threat modeling classes and talking about Stride and doing workshops on threat modeling. And over time, it wasn't, the next day, but we had engineers doing their own threat modelings, publishing them with their technical designs. And yeah, it's not 100%, but more than zero is a great outcome for threat modeling by engineers. And then it's the engineer's threat model and security as a partner versus security does all threat modeling, which is not sustainable. Like, we will never scale, BSIM data, approximately like 100 software engineers to every one security group engineer. We're never going to have one-to-one. So we have to figure out, how do we get other engineers to distribute the load of security? And I think that's a good example.
Yeah, it's a great example, as a matter of fact, because, if you want to identify how would a hacker would behave to exploit the system, just ask the engineer. Yes, the engineer would likely have the idea if the engineer is, let's say, is capable enough, which is the expectation, right? When you chat with someone that needs to build a threat model, it's typically someone that you trust to build a threat model. And then obviously security can just ask more questions to make sure that the right questions were asked during the threat model, right? Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. Like, we can't I mean, I guess I can try to explain this. Like, as a security person, quote unquote, I have had so many robust security conversations with people without the word security in their title. Engineers are engineers. Like, yes, we have a full-time job of security engineering, but that does not somehow preclude them from knowing a ton about security themselves. And similarly, I think one of the things that I focused on with teams I've built is, and again, you can see a range of opinions here, but I tend to hire, application security engineers who have at least been a software engineer for some part of their career. It's not one-to-one, and I definitely wouldn't like keep someone out if they're really good at certain, skill sets, but it's hard to have the empathy center if you've not actually had to ship code. It's hard to understand product development life cycles if you've never had a product. And so these are things that immediately change the feeling, the way that you share feedback, and going back to collaboration, right? Like understanding where someone's coming from is central to effective communication. And we've seen a very good history of not effectively communicating in the security industry. So I think that's like another part of this is it's not about just meeting engineers where they are, but understanding that's why they are there in the first place, or how they're doing their day-to-day job. That's something you cannot go to school for. Like, you have to steep yourself in the ways that they actually work. And you can do that via shadowing. There's mentorship opportunities there as well. But that's a very, very beneficial outcome when it's possible.
Just as you describe this environment, Mark, you're talking about education, you're talking about providing tool sets, you're talking about collaboration, and then there's this dynamic of one security engineer to 100 engineers. And for whatever reason, this concept of like the secure engineer came to my head. Like, you actually want 100 secure engineers to every security engineer, right? I don't know if there's anything there, but that's what I
mean, you hit on a point, which I'm sure we'll hit on another version of this sometime. There's been this very devoted idea of security champion programs, right? That's such a cool thing to talk about, that you have a security champion program. I've seen very few good security champion programs, to the point that I don't try to run them myself, because I think it sets almost like theatrical version of what we're trying to achieve here. It's not this like patting people on the head and giving them like Amazon gift cards. It changes the dynamic where it's not about building a shared vision. It's about it's like participation trophies and security, which I think is very detrimental to relationships. So when I think of these opportunities, what I'm really trying to understand, and I'll give you a good example of this. One thing I'm really passionate about is having office hours. The office hours gives people a vehicle where, yeah, some people want to talk about security and PRs. Some people want to, go and whiteboard stuff out. But to not give people opportunities to talk to the security team, it's in a consistent, easy to access, made for them to be, again, customer success enabled. We had one example I can think of off the top of my head where someone came into office hours and said, hey, and it was like, how do I do this weird thing in cryptography for LDAP? And we're like, well, why are you trying to do that weird thing in cryptography in the first place? And we unpacked it and got like the general idea of what they were doing. And it turned out like we had missed like the design doc at one point in time or whatever. And we actually had to hold the line and say like, hey, the actual design you have here is fundamentally flawed. Like, no amount of crypto, no amount of, cool stuff will solve it. And so it really gets back to when we told them that and we explained it to them, we explained it in terms that were resonating with them, that they came to the conclusion that it was unshippable. Like, we did not say hold the line for us because we want you to hold the line. Like, we explained the thesis about the risk model, and they knew that this was not going to happen anymore. That's the kind of education that they will take back to their team. They will take back to the next team. They will share widely. There's use cases and anecdotes and postmortems. Those are the things that build secure engineers, as you worded it. And that's impossible to make a better outcome than that.
I'd love to dive into, and you've touched on a few of them. What are some of the critical factors that lead to this positive, productive relationship between engineering and application security? I think you've described a very positive environment, and you've mentioned a few things that security is doing that your team is doing. But can you share with us some examples where you've experienced this collaboration and what led to that collaboration in your career?
Yeah, and another point we haven't touched on yet, but I think that's a good transition point for this one as well. Appsec, of course, is like a domain of expertise. If we kind of translate a little bit to like the product security side of this, right? The kind of the umbrella of product security. One thing that I think a lot of security engineer or product security teams stop short of is I focus a little bit less on the software development lifecycle than I think other leaders in my space. And I actually think a lot more about the product development lifecycle. I think about the relationships with my product managers. I think about their roadmap. I think about feature selection. I think about product briefs and product requirements documents. When we talk about shifting left, the shifting left goes even further, right? It's not just about the software development. It's about, is the feature we're about to create fundamentally flawed? Because if it's fundamentally flawed, then you have a bunch of engineers trying to build a technical specification to course correct for something that is kind of out of the box, a problem to do. So one thing that I had done previously is, and kudos to my old boss, Mike Hanley, who's the CISO at GitHub these days. He actually came to me with an idea, which was to build effectively this product security enhancements roadmap. So this isn't like bug fixes. This is like, we've got a fundamental part of our product that we want to make better for security. It could be for a customer request. It could be like, we know we should do it because it's the right thing for our customers for their security. But we basically built this pretty short, like 10 or 12 items. We rank stacked their priority and we associated which product team was most relevant. And every single quarter, I was in every Monday, and I can tell you this from my memory, like I was in every Monday product leaders meeting. It was already a good start. But every quarter I would present to that meeting and say, hey, here's where we're at. Here's the thing that we knocked down last quarter. And we did try to boil the ocean. Like every quarter I tried to get one big investment from one product manager, make another success story, make another great outcome, and then move on, right? Like if you're trying to do 12 work streams with 12 different product managers in one quarter, you're already doomed. And so that was an example where that level of relationship, just talking to an engineering manager is not enough. The engineering managers are often not working for in the divisive way, but like the product manager is often the ones telling the eng manager what the quarterly goal is, what is going to ship, what are the customer requirements. And so if you're not partnering with the product manager, you can have the best relationship with your eng manager. You're not going to get very far if it's not on the roadmap.
I can't tell you how excited I am to hear that. I have a background in product management and managing product managers. And one of the things that was really challenging about working in security companies, building products that need to be highly secure, was when these requirements would sort of come out of nowhere, seemingly, right? I've got a whole go-to-market plan that I've built with timing, and I'm working and collaborating across marketing and our events team and our comms team. And all of a sudden these security requirements come in and all of that kind of gets shifted. But by heading that off at the outset, going into those planning meetings quarterly and then weekly, you brought this product management team to your table, basically. And I love that form of collaboration, not only with the engineering managers, but also with the product team. That's awesome.
So I need to follow up on that because it's really fascinating. What got them excited to take a security functionality and just run with it? And then after you answer, happy to hear, Simon, what would have excited him to do that.
I think the generic quip all of us make in security is like, speak like the business speaks, right? And so each of those roadmap items had the justification. A lot of the justifications were, we have this many customers in our product management feedback tool that we're tracking requests that call this out as a problem with their auditor, a concern about their RFP process, sales friction on deals, right? Like we associated those cases to the value proposition of the enhancement. In other cases, being a security company working on a security product, we would often have things that were fundamental to trust. So if, for instance, we had a really very in the weeds things for the audience, but when the early days of what was then U2F, which has evolved to WebAuthn, which now we're talking about like passkeys and it's kind of this evolution. We at Duo, we actually had a really very early implementation of U2F, and there were some decisions made at the time that were not like malicious or shortcuts, but the kind of the evolution of how it would be better in our platform came to be, a year later. And so we went back to say, listen, if we're a customer of ourselves, like we're dog fooding our own product, do we feel like this is the best we could have done? And the answer was no. And so from a trust standpoint, it is a very bad idea to lose trust in a security product with security customers. And so we actually went back and said, we made the case that like, we know our customers, if they understood the nuance here, they would be unhappy because we're unhappy. And therefore we should do the right thing for them before someone calls us out and says like, this is not the best way it could have been. So it ranged between like revenue attainment, churn prevention, brand and trust in the market. But any of those cases were documented fully in the justification for why.
I just got to piggyback on that and say, I think the approach is where the win is. So Mark's approach of building the business case and really going deep on understanding the customer need and the customer benefit that comes from the work that, your team is driving, that's the answer. Because at the end of the day, as a product manager, at least, not a sociopathic product manager, I hope, it's not that my idea is the best idea. It's what is the most value we can deliver to the customer in the shortest period of time and be most effective at, delivering that value. And so it's the disruption, it's the like out of nowhere that is so challenging as a product owner. But if you're being collaborative and bringing the value case forward up front, then it becomes, oh, great. Okay, here's this other way that I can actually deliver value to my customer through the product that we're building. Let's work this in. And so I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, there's one other case that comes to mind of that same roadmap where, annual pen tests, we all know what those look like. For the last couple of years, we had kind of the same result on every pen test, but we had like a really good, technically sound explanation of why that was okay. And the reality is customers don't want to know why it's okay. They just don't want it to be a problem in the first place, right? Like if you have to keep making, not excuses, but like justifications, all you're doing is increasing, again, sales friction, back and forth with customers during deal cycles, adding concern about like the maturity of your program. And so that was one of the items that we actually had. It was actually dozens of engineers were involved in this particular thing. And it was such a non-event in terms of like, it was not that big of a deal in the technical sense, but it was a huge deal in making our customers more confident that we were the right vendor for them. And yeah, I don't know what the price tag on that sort of thing is, right? There's a bit of a priceless one there, but those are the kinds of things that would never get prioritized in a day-to-day just feature development cycle. And so whether it's bringing down like security debt or whether it's like course correcting for a bad decision 5 years ago, those are things that just need a different vehicle to interface with your product team on.
And I just got to add one last thing, which is so often we talk about the concept of budgets in security, right? There's never enough budget. You're viewed as a cost center. But I think that the way you've described this engagement model and this collaboration that you're driving with the engineering managers, the product managers, it really actually brings security onto the side of the table of revenue generating as opposed to being a cost center. And that is so invaluable for a security team to be able to say, hey, we are able to tie this security work to our ability to bring our product to market with trust, to be able to sell to customers who care about the secure nature of the product. That I think is such a valuable piece of advice for security teams and how they can drive security value within their organization. In the interest of time, I want to move on and just kind of pose an open-ended question to you, Mark. Where do you see application security, and maybe we'll expand it to product security, moving over the next 5 years? What are going to be the themes that we are really seeing unfold over that period of time?
Yeah, I mean, two that I think about, one a little bit more recent. Number one, the one that's been a little bit more widely worked on is the integration of different signals in security, right? And so, similar to kind of what Arnica is looking at, there's the developer security, like how are you preventing over permissive actions in your GitHub repo, right? We've seen compromise after compromise of entire GitHub works. We can't just ignore GitHub and like somehow pretend like that's not a problem. That literally is everything, down to, you know, your software composition analysis, your license management, your static code analysis. All of those different signals have to be pulled into some singular place. We talk about single panes of glass for the last 50 years in tech, but it really has to be to maximize the shared value of those signals in complement, right? Having vacuum A and vacuum B and vacuum C is not approachable. And we have so many tools, and we have so many technologies, and we have so many integration points and so many SaaS services. We've really got to keep working on refining how do we bring all of that value into one place that is actionable, additive to each investment you're making. And I'm really excited. I mean, we've seen versions of that, and we see more movement towards that. And I'm personally excited for that. I built something like that years ago at another company, and it, you know, I would rather have not built it. I would have rather just bought it. That would have been awesome. So that's one good thing. The more maybe controversial, and I kind of cringe as well, is you know, generative AI. I think where we're at right now is, as soon as, you know, like GitHub Copilot came out, there was a whole bunch of very, very myopic, navel-gazing people saying like, oh, look, it wrote like SQL injection in its code snippet, but then they've like seeded bad code into it, trying to get it to generate. And it's like, well, that just did what you showed it to do. I don't think you understood what happened here. What I would say is, yeah, we're super early in things like Copilot or other generative AI for software engineers. However, I think we're going to figure out how to make it so that it's not giving you SQL injection snippets in your IDE. And for me, that sort of capability is will be at some point, maybe not 5 years, but at some point will be a core way that we prevent security harm. And I'm excited to see that road come through. I'm excited to see how we get there. So I'm not necessarily the Gen AI fanboy, but I do think there's a lot of power in being where the developer is and giving them code in a corpus that is the corpus of security engineering at a company, and being able to dynamically and polymorphically generate code that is secure relative to the ways of design patterns and libraries and tech stacks they're using. That is a very powerful thing, and it's not going to be tomorrow, but we're going to get there. And I think that's going to be immensely important.
You know what could be pretty cool? You know, today you can, let's say, use GitHub Copilot to do the, you know, start a comment. It depends on which language you write. You write the name of the function or what you want it to do, and then it creates a piece of code for you. Yes, it also generated malicious code, or not malicious, vulnerable code in one of my tests. But try to do the opposite test. Write a function, and then start the comment and see if it suggests you an explanation of what it is. And if I think, you know, insane line where you're going with that is, hey, is there any issue here? Or, you know, a question that you can ask in line that will hopefully give you an answer.
Yeah, and I think one of the cool, and again, this is a little bit, you know, out there, but, you know, we're talking a lot about like prompt engineering. But, you know, prompt engineering at its heart is knowing which question to ask to get the right answer. And a lot of security engineers' time is spent saying, hey, you're going to use this interface. Let me go look at the RFC. Let me go look at the docs for the library. Let me go look at X, Y, and Z. And I think it's that sort of automation that the promise of Gen AI is to give us, hey, here are 5 examples that we think are more secure patterns for all the data that we just ingested and compared and contrasted. That's a very hard thing for a human to do without a ton of toil and labor. And so even if it's not like the code is automatically written secure, I do think that there's so much complexity in modern tech stacks and so much like, you know, asynchronous function calls and concerns about, you know, race conditions between these multi-tier and n-tier stacks. And there's just a lot to get right at this point. And I think technologies like Gen AI will help us narrow the funnel of focus to know where we need to look the hardest. And whether you take things like static code analysis that of course has been evolved, and, you know, you've seen AI versions of AI and static code analysis for a while, a lot of making sure that the rule set that you're writing is understanding the actual corpus of badness at a like very deep level. Because if you just say, don't do this pattern, don't do this pattern, at some point there's like a slight nuance to that pattern and the tool misses it completely. I do think that's where like that generative AI capability could come in handy to automate the corpus generation for different rule sets. That is, again, just a lot of pain and annoyance for an engineering team to do manually. So, there's no, this is not like panacea world, but I do think there are some really novel and productivity enhancing ways for this to go right.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Mark, we're going to jump into the lightning round to close this out. So if you were the leader of an anonymous hacker group, what would it be called?
So the anonymous part's kind of funny. Like, I think like it would probably be something obnoxious like a null byte, because the null byte is like, you can't really see it. And that kind of like lends itself to the anonymous part. But also when you type the null byte in, it's implicitly going to maybe break some applications that don't handle null bytes. So I feel like that's like a really good hacker name. Is it's obfuscated, but it's also malicious. It's kind of the best of both worlds.
Common Easter egg. Love that. Excellent. And how do you take your coffee?
Usually, hot, I guess, is a question, right? That's one good attribute. 2 Splenda, maybe almond milk if I'm feeling adventurous that day. But yeah, it's pretty simple.
Nice. And what advice would you give a young aspiring security professional?
Yeah, great question. I talk to a lot of, students. I talk to early stage people all the time. This actually a nice capstone to your first question, Simon. When I started my career, I was not trying to be in security. I was trying to be passionate about technology, and then security was just part and parcel to that. I do feel like there's a bit of a focus on being a security professional, like getting a security degree, going to security training boot camps. And we've kind of lost, I think, a little bit of the passion part of like, if you want to be a software engineer, you will probably learn or want to learn more about software security and AppSec. If you're a cloud security engineer, you'll want to learn more. And so my advice to, earlier people or students or whatever, try to really get in love with some part of technology first and build that as a springboard. Because similar to what we talked about a little bit earlier, if you do not know how software engineers build software, if you do not know how cloud operations teams operate clouds, you're going to have a tough and frustrating time, and they're going to have probably a tough and frustrating time with you. So don't be too excited to be a security hacker person. Go be excited about all the capabilities and creativity that comes from engineering, and then figure out how security is applicable or the value or the impact of good security or bad security. I think people have a much more robust career, and they'll also have, I think, the right mindset and the right heart behind what they're doing.
Love it. Okay, and then I have one last question for you. Michigan or Michigan State, since you're in Detroit?
Michigan. I did not go to either, but go blue, I think, is the answer.
Mark, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, great time, guys. Always love kind of talking shop in the industry, and we've got a long ways to go, but I think, conversations like these hopefully make people a little bit more inspired to do a little bit better than we've done previously.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark.